That's very difficult. I think I knew for a very long time that I wasn't good at recognizing faces, but actually to say see them differently from other people, I think it wasn't until I was formally tested, which was, what, 7 or 8 years ago, so I was already in my 50s by then. I think it's just that you grow up with your own perception of the world, and so you assume that everybody perceives the world in the same way as you do. After a while you begin to realize that you're better at some things than others. So I was never as good at maths as some of my friends, but I was better at chemistry and biology. And similarly, I knew from a fairly young age, probably before I was 10, that I wasn't terribly good at recognizing people and would sometimes make mistakes, and that other people were better. But I suppose I just viewed it in the same way as you would view any particular skill, where I was on the continuum. And I thought, well, I'm glad that's not in the school test, because I'd probably be fairly low down and getting 4 out of 10 see me. When I see a face, I see it in as much detail, I believe, as anybody else would. The problem really comes when I turn away, when very rapidly I lose any memory for what that face looks like, except in a very general sense, because I can't identify individuals. Then what I'm doing is looking at a face in a very analytical way. So I'm saying, how big is his nose? How prominent is her chin? And I'm trying to put it together. And then sometimes there are additional features. I know that that's my friend because I recognize her pearl earrings, which are very distinctive. Few people have tattoos, you can see. That's a big hint. My understanding of it is that we all, or everyone except people like me, has a facial recognition center, and that's quite clearly defined on things like functional MRI. And in people like myself, this simply either isn't there as a functioning entity or is damaged in some way. So that when a normal person looks at a face, this activates a particular recognition pathway, which then allows that person to compare the face they're looking at with thousands of stored memories of other faces they've come across and say, oh yes, that's the one, ping. And I just don't have that. The way they do it, they show you half a dozen photographs in a strip, and then they will show you random photographs. You have to say whether you've seen this face before or not. And I found this extremely stressful. And then as the final thing, the assistant doing it said, right, now what we're going to do is to repeat the thing, but the faces will be upside down. And I said something extremely rude at that point, implying that I thought that this was very unreasonable torture. And she smiled at me and said, well, carry on and have a go. And I was amazed at the end of it to discover that once the face is upside down, I'm within the normal range. And that isn't because I get better, it's because everybody else gets worse. So the face recognition pathway only recognizes faces the right way up. So if you want to know what my world is like, one way would be to stand on your head. Another way would be just to try yourself on upside down photographs of people's faces, and you will find that you're very bad at it. In fact, for upside down faces, I'm well within the normal range. I'm at the top end of the normal range. And that's because of the analytical way that I have to look at faces, means that I'm just doing the same thing whether they're the right way up or upside down. Whereas for you, suddenly that ping that I know which face this is no longer there. The problem that I have clearly runs through my family, because I know that my father has it. He's now blind through macular degeneration, but he certainly couldn't recognize people well when he could see perfectly. And I never met my grandfather, but the way he describes him is as a man who would walk past you in the street and not say hello. Well, that sounds like me, because I wouldn't have recognized him. So that runs in the family. The other thing that runs in the family is an amazing recall for facts. So my grandfather was an international bridge player who apparently could just put out any hand that he'd ever played and showed you, how it worked and where they scored. My father always had an encyclopedic knowledge of films and music and plants. And similarly, if anybody wants to know why did we end up doing this in this way in our particular department, they always come to me because I can always tell them in detail exactly how it happened. So I think there are two things which are running in parallel through the family. One of the oddities of this is that the better looking you are, the more difficult you are to recognize, because beauty seems to be symmetrical and perfect. So the fashion for people to have their teeth straightened makes life much more difficult for me. When people often had crooked teeth and things, then that made it easier for me to identify them. My wife pointed out to me that actually I shouldn't tell people that, because inevitably when I say, it's easy to recognize you because of your nose, they're aware that they've got a big bent nose, and that's the last thing they want to hear from you. So nowadays, if I'm feeling a bit flirtatious, then I say, well, the reason I don't recognize you is actually you're very good looking. And the more good looking you are, the more symmetrical you are, the more perfect you are, the more difficult it is for me. Faces are clearly not what makes us human, but where we express our humanity and our personality, our beauty. Yes, I see all that, and faces are distinctive. So I suppose that's why not being able to recognize a face is so important, because that's where we really define our individuality.